Maplewood Park hummed with the lazy energy of Saturday morning. Sunlight filtered through oak leaves, dappling the playground in gold, while the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with laughter. 8-year-old Amara Johnson soared on her favorite swing, her braids flying behind her like ribbons. "Higher, Daddy," she called. Though her father wasn't pushing her, he'd promised to let her go solo today, a big kid milestone. Police Chief Elijah Johnson leaned against a distant picnic table, his posture relaxed, but eyes sharp behind aviator sunglasses. He'd spent years teaching Amara to navigate the world shadows, but today, he'd vowed, was for light. Across the park, Vince Harlan slumped on a bench, his steel-toed boots crushing an empty beer can. Construction layoffs had left him idle and itchy, his mind festering with the toxic rhetoric he'd binge-watched online. "They're stealing our jobs, our neighborhoods," his gaze snagged on Amara's swing. Of course, he thought, lip curling. Even the damn parks aren't safe anymore. Amara pumped her legs harder, sneakers grazing the clouds. She'd just mastered the rhythm, leaned back, kick forward, when her shoe dislodged a spray of sand. It dusted Vince's boots. "Hey!" he barked, lurching upright. Amara froze mid-swing. Sorry, mister." Elijah straightened, hand instinctively drifting toward his hip. Vince's face flushed mottled red. "Watch where you're flinging that filth, you little—" "Sir." The word, low and edged, cut through the air before Vince could finish. Elijah stood 10 feet away, a silhouette of authority in his crisp navy uniform. Amara scrambled off the swing, darting behind her father's leg. Vince's jaw twitched. He'd seen the chief's face in the news, community outreach photos, press conferences. Up close, the man was a mountain. "Kid's a nuisance," Vince muttered, jabbing a finger at Amara. "Oughta control her." Elijah's smile didn't reach his eyes. She apologized. "Let's move on." For a heartbeat, the park held its breath. Then Vince spat into the sand. Typical. Coddling your kind. Amara peered up at her father. "Daddy, what's he mean?" Elijah's pulse roared in his ears. He'd trained for this de-escalation diplomacy, but blood pounded hot behind his badge. Before he could speak, Vince turned to leave, shoulder-checking Elijah as he passed. "This ain't over," Vince growled, loud enough for Amara to flinch. Elijah watched him stalk toward the parking lot, then knelt to Amara's level. "You okay, superhero?" She nodded, but her hands trembled. "Come on." He hoisted her onto his shoulders, her favorite perch. "Let's get ice cream." As they walked, Amara pressed her cheek to his head. Why was that man so mean? Elijah tightened his grip on her knees. Some people forget how to be people. Behind them, unnoticed, Vince lingered at the park gate. Phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, it's me," he hissed. "Need a favor. That cop chief's kid? I've got an idea." Above, the sun dipped behind a cloud. Vince Harlan's pickup truck idled outside a weathered diner on the outskirts of town, its neon sign flickering "Joe's Eats" into the dusk. Inside, a hulking figure slid into the booth opposite him. Derek, a former co-worker with 1488 tattooed on his knuckles. "You sure about this?" Derek muttered, glancing at the napkin where Vince had scrawled, "Teach that pig a lesson." Vince's grin was all teeth. "Ain't about him. It's about sending a message." At the Johnson household, Amara traced the scratch on her wrist, a pink line from the park bench. Elijah knelt beside her bed, uniform traded for a faded college hoodie. "Monsters only win if you let 'em scare you," he said, tucking her in. "But what if he comes back?" Amara whispered. Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then he answers to me." Thursday afternoon. Maplewood Park again. Amara hesitated at the swing set, her courage a flickering candle. Be a superhero, she told herself, echoing her dad. She gripped the chains, kicked off. "Look who's back!" Vince's voice slithered through the air. He loomed over her, reeking of stale beer and malice. Thought you'd learn your lesson. I didn't do anything. Amara stammered. Your existence is doing something. He shoved her. Hard. Amara's hands slipped. She crashed into the sand, the world a blur of tears and twisted metal. Across the playground, 72-year-old Mrs. Wu fumbled with her phone. Record! Damn it, record! Teenager Marcus, earbuds dangling, sprinted toward Amara. Stay down, kid, Vince warned, but Marcus stepped between them, arms spread. Back! Off! Elijah's patrol car screeched into the lot, sirens wailing. Vince lunged not at Amara, but at Marcus. You're all the same. A gunshot cracked the sky. Enough! Elijah stood, weapon aimed at the ground, eyes volcanic. Vince Harlan, you're under arrest? Vince laughed, wild and unhinged. For what? Disciplining your brat? Elijah's cuffs snapped shut. Hate crime assault. Enjoy the spotlight. As Vince was hauled away, Mrs. Wu's video, 45 seconds of fury, escaped into the digital wild. The police station buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Vince Harlan sat in the interrogation room, his cuffed hands drumming a restless rhythm on the table. Across from him, Elijah Johnson stood, his uniform crisp but his face a storm. The air between them crackled with unspoken history. Not just today's violence, but generations of prejudice simmering beneath the surface. You think this changes anything? Vince sneered, leaning back in his chair. You're just a token. A puppet in a uniform. Elijah's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. This isn't about me. It's about a little girl you pushed into the dirt because her skin offended you. Vince snorted. Offended? That kid's a walking reminder of everything wrong with this country. You think locking me up fixes that? Elijah leaned forward, his palms flat on the table. No, but it's a start. Outside the station, a crowd had gathered. Protesters with signs reading Justice for Amara and End Hate Now chanted in unison. News vans lined the street, their satellite antennas piercing the sky like spears. Mrs. Wu's video had gone viral, and the world was watching. Amara sat in the back of a squad car, wrapped in a blanket, her wrist bandaged. A female officer handed her a stuffed bear. Your dad's a hero, you know, she said softly. Amara hugged the bear. He's just my dad. Inside, Elijah slid a photo across the table, a close-up of Amara's scraped wrist. This is what you did. To a child. Because she exists? Vince glanced at the photo, then away. She's not innocent. None of you are. Elijah's jaw tightened. You don't get to decide who's innocent. The law does. And the law says you're done. Vince smirked. We'll see about that. The door opened, and a detective stepped in. Chief, we've got Derek in holding. He's singing like a canary. Elijah nodded. Good. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. By nightfall, the story had exploded. News anchors dissected the video, pundits debated hate crime laws, and social media erupted with hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Amara, hashtag Chief Johnson, hashtag End Racism. At home, Elijah tucked Amara into bed. You were brave today, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I was scared, she admitted. So was I, Elijah said. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing anyway. Amara nodded, her eyes heavy. Will he hurt anyone else? Elijah kissed her forehead. Not if I can help it. In his cell, Vince stared at the ceiling, the weight of his choices pressing down. For the first time, doubt crept in. What if I'm wrong? But the thought was fleeting, drowned out by the echo of his own rage. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Elijah's home office, casting long shadows over the stacks of paperwork and case files. He rubbed his temples, the weight of the past 48 hours pressing down on him like a boulder. The phone buzzed incessantly, reporters, city officials, even the governor's office. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Amara sat at the kitchen table, her bandaged wrist resting on a coloring book. She'd been quiet since the park, her usual spark dimmed. Elijah knelt beside her, his voice soft. "How's my superhero today?" She looked up, her eyes wide. "Daddy, are people mad at me?" Elijah's heart ached. "No, baby. They're mad at the man who hurt you. They want to make sure he can't do it again." At the courthouse, Vince Harlan shuffled into the arraignment room, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the polished wood and marble. His lawyer, a harried man with a coffee stain on his tie, whispered furiously in his ear, "Plead not guilty. We'll fight this." Vince smirked. "Damn right we will." The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, scanned the charges. "Mr. Harlan, you're accused of assault with a hate crime enhancement. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Vince said, his voice dripping with defiance. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Bail is set at $250,000. Next case." Outside, the crowd roared. Protesters waved signs and chanted, their voices a unified cry for justice. News cameras swarmed as Elijah stepped up to the mic, Amara clutching his hand. "Today isn't just about my family," Elijah said, his voice steady. "It's about every child who's ever been made to feel less than because of who they are. We will not let hate win." The crowd erupted in applause, but Elijah's eyes stayed on Amara. She looked up at him, a small smile breaking through her fear. Back at the station, the detectives worked tirelessly. Derek's confession had opened a floodgate of information, names, dates, plans. "This goes deeper than Vince," one detective said, sliding a file across Elijah's desk. "He's part of a network." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then we take the whole network down." That night, Elijah tucked Amara into bed. "You were amazing today," he said, brushing a kiss on her forehead. "Will it ever stop?" she asked, her voice small. Elijah sighed. "I don't know, baby, but we'll keep fighting." Together, as he closed her door, his phone buzzed, a text from the mayor. "We need to talk. Urgent." Elijah stared at the screen, the weight of the world settling on his shoulders. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. The air buzzed with tension, a live wire waiting to spark. At the defense table, Vince Harlan sat slouched, his smirk firmly in place. Across the room, Elijah Johnson stood tall, his uniform a beacon of authority. Amara sat in the front row, clutching a stuffed bear, her eyes wide and unblinking. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Laura Bennett, opened with Mrs. Wu's video. The screen flickered to life, showing Vince's snarling face as he shoved Amara into the sand. Gasps rippled through the room. "This," Laura said, pausing the video, "is not just an assault. It's a hate crime, a deliberate act of violence fueled by prejudice." Vince's lawyer, a slick man named Greg Harris, stood. "Objection. My client's actions were not motivated by hate, but by frustration." The child kicked sand at him. "Objection sustained," the judge said, though her tone suggested she wasn't buying it. Amara took the stand, her tiny frame dwarfed by the chair. Laura knelt to her level. "Can you tell us what happened that day, Amara?" Amara glanced at her father, who gave her a reassuring nod. "I was on the swing," she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to kick sand. I said sorry, but he pushed me." "And how did that make you feel?" Amara's lip quivered, scared and sad. "I didn't know why he didn't like me." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. Vince's defense called Derek to the stand, hoping to paint Vince as a misguided man influenced by bad company. But under Laura's cross-examination, Derek cracked. "You're part of the group, aren't you?" Laura asked. Derek hesitated. I don't know what you mean." Laura pulled up photos of Derek's tattoos and text messages. "This is a white supremacist group, and Vince Harlan is a member." "Correct." Derek glanced at Vince, who glared daggers. "Yeah," he muttered. The jury's eyes widened. Outside, the crowd had swelled. Protesters chanted, their voices a unified roar. News cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the trial to a captivated nation. Elijah stepped onto the courthouse steps, Amara by his side. "Today is about more than one man's hate," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's about standing up for what's right, for our children, for our future." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Elijah's eyes stayed on Amara. She looked up at him, a small smile breaking through her fear. Back inside, the jury returned with their verdict. "Guilty." The word echoed through the room, a hammer striking an anvil. Vince's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of shock. The judge slammed her gavel. 5 years in prison, plus mandatory anti-racism education. As Vince was led away in cuffs, he locked eyes with Elijah. "This isn't over," he spat. Elijah met his gaze unflinching. "For you it is." 5 years later, Maplewood Park thrived with life, its once quiet swing set now the heart of a sprawling garden. A bronze plaque glinted beneath Amara's swing here. "Courage chose kindness. May we all rise." Teenage Amara, her braids streaked with purple, laughed as she pushed a giggling boy in a wheelchair, his legs too weak to pump, but his joy uncontainable. Across the park, Elijah Johnson shook hands with city council members, the sleeves of his civilian shirt rolled up. He'd retired his badge last year, trading it for a nonprofit directing youth outreach programs. "The Roots initiative isn't just about parks," he told the crowd. "It's about planting justice where hate tried to take root." In an upstate prison, Vince Harlan hunched over a letter, his calloused fingers tracing Amara's loopy handwriting. "Dear Mr. Harlan, I'm 13 now. I still think about that day. Not because I'm scared, but because it taught me people can change. My dad says you finished the anti-racism classes. Is that true? If you ever get out, there's a garden here with your name on a bench, not to honor you, but to remind us what happens when we forget to be human. You don't have to write back, but if you do, tell me one good thing you've learned." Amara then stared at the words, the paper trembling. Guards had mocked the bench rumor, but the warden confirmed it. Johnson insisted. Said everyone deserves a chance to sit and choose better. He reached for a pen. That evening, Amara stood at the garden's edge, clutching Vince's reply. Her father waited silently, his presence a steady anchor. "Amara, the first good thing, I learned your middle name is Diane. Mine's Thomas. We're both someone's kid. Second, hate is heavy. Carrying it made me smaller. Third, I'm sorry. Vince." A breeze stirred the wind chimes above the swing. Amara tucked the letter into her pocket. "Do you think he means it?" Elijah watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of amber and rose. "Does it matter?" Amara tilted her head. "Yes and no." At dawn, a work crew arrived to install Vince's bench. The carpenter paused, frowning at the engraving. "Vince Thomas Harlan, choose lighter. Weirdest damn memorial," he muttered. Amara approached, handing him a pot of marigolds. "It's not for him. It's for us." As she walked away, the carpenter shrugged and set the flowers on the bench. By noon, someone had added a handwritten note. "I chose kindness today. Thanks, Amara." That night, Elijah found Amara swinging under the stars, her face tipped toward the sky. "Coming in?" Not yet, she said, kicking higher. I'm waiting. For what? She grinned. To see how far I can fly. Somewhere in a cell 200 miles north, Vince stared at a patch of moonlight on the wall, lighter than he'd ever felt.